Welcome everyone. My name is Calvin Carpenter. I'm a product marketing manager for cybersecurity at Hughes. Joining me today is Patrick Geiger, senior cybersecurity consultant, also from Hughes, and Andrew Abel, senior vice president and cyber insurance expert at Marsh. If you're here for the webinar on 12 key cybersecurity controls, then you're in the right spot. We have a lot of great information to share today, and we're going to get right into it. One thing I will mention before we get started is that we will have some time at the end for a chat-based Q&A. So if any questions come to mind while we're talking, please write them down, and you can submit those questions at the end through the Q&A tool in Teams. Not the chat tool, but the Q&A tool specifically. And we'd love to answer those questions as they come in. So fantastic. To kick things off, Pat, would you mind getting us started with a brief intro?
Sure. Yeah, just to set the stage, good afternoon. I'm Pat Geiger. I'm one of the cybersecurity consultants here at Hughes. And really what prompted this webinar was for the last year and a half, I've been hearing from your peers that cyber liability insurance carriers are demanding that their clients have security solutions installed. They're either saying, hey, you have to have an endpoint, managed endpoint, or next gen antivirus, network detection. And by the way, you have to have it installed within 90 days, or your rates are increasing anywhere from 100 to 300%. So in the spirit of community, Marsh and Hughes, we wanted to offer an educational webinar to help you to really understand steps to be proactive, from a leading, and this is coming from a leading cyber liability carrier, and we'll hear from Andrew from Marsh in a second. I'm going to turn it back to Calvin and Andrew in a moment, but I wanted to update everybody on a report that came out today from let me get this right, ISC2, that's ISC2, Cybersecurity Workforce Study. I think this report comes out once a year. Bottom line is that the shortage of cyber workers is now it's nearly a 4 million deficit. So the number used to be thrown around, it was 3.25 million cyber liability workers. It's now nearly 4 million, and that's despite an increase of cyber workforce growing nearly 10% over the last year. So the threat is escalating, and the defense is shrinking. And I think we can help here at Hughes, and that's the reason why Hughes announced at the beginning of this year that we're leveraging our 50 years of enterprise security expertise to help the mid-market by expanding our suite of services to include managed detection response, MDR, SOC as a service, security operations center, as well as SASE, network detection, and endpoint detection, et cetera. And we're doing this to address specific demands, and we're tailoring it according to what the company, a prospect or somebody needs. We have a complete suite, but we can break it up basically. And by the way, and also we can do it affordably. So thanks for your time today, and I'll turn it back over to Calvin and Andrew, and thanks for joining us.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pat. So there are 12 cybersecurity controls that Andrew's going to talk about. I think that's important because I think that too many businesses and organizations learn about these tools, but they don't learn enough about how they work together. And hopefully what we share today will help us understand the big picture. It'll help keep your cyber liability premiums in check, and show you how to get started on building a complete cybersecurity architecture that will hold up against today's modern threat landscape. And with that, I'll let Andrew take us away.
Thank you, Calvin. Can everyone hear me just to make sure before I start rambling? Excellent. And I did figure out my video, so feeling very pleased with myself. Thank you both to Patrick and Calvin for the introduction, generally speaking, and for including me in today's webinar. So really look forward to speaking to everybody today. Happy to answer any questions at any point. Certainly want to make sure not only is it a good conversation where I'm not simply just talking at everyone, but also frankly that all of the stakeholders here, you've afforded us a valuable amount of your time. So we want to make sure, right, that you each get something out of this conversation, and we give you actionable information that can help you every day. So if anything that we're speaking of is not on point, or we want to pivot, happy to do so. Really quickly, just by way of background, my name is Andrew Abold. I work for Marsh, which is a division of Marsh McLennan Companies. Marsh individually is the largest risk services firm in the world. So our principal function for our customers is to advise them on risks and to help them, manage and transfer those risks via various strategies. Our principal bread and butter in terms of revenue generating activity is the procurement and placement of commercial insurance for our customers. So my expertise and background, I was an underwriter for over a decade, focusing on cyber and technology risk, similar to those trends, right, that Patrick spoke about in terms of the kind of cybersecurity IT workforce. Cyber insurance, right, is an area that was hotly emerging in the early 2000s. It was not an area that had a significant amount of labor force, or underwriting really was nascent 20 years ago. It has been a huge boom industry for the insurance economy, right? Both our firm, we make it a critical driver of everything we do, technology and cyber risk and how it affects our customers. But all of the underwriters were, or carriers and their underwriters were racing to write this business because it has historically been, not only incredibly profitable, but also a huge and growing area of the economy, right? So much more exciting than thinking about aging population or things like that from an insurance standpoint. So it's been a big growth driver over the last 20 years. And individually, I work with, large customers who are working to procure cyber and technology risk insurance, typically well over $1 billion in revenue, but also have a significant amount of experience servicing SME type customers as well. And these issues really affect firms across the entire economy, regardless of scale, industry, et cetera. And the bad guys are also relatively agnostic in terms of having any warm feelings to the victims. They're principally working very hard to launch an attack that's going to be successful and that is going to be monetized, right? That they're going to turn the screws to the victims in a way that really compels payment, and they've been highly successful at doing that. This is just some of the credentialing information about our firm. Again, I don't think we need to bore everyone with this information, but what is really interesting is Marsh has a very deep, kind of lens and purview, across the economy, but particularly how the economy manages cyber risk. We're at the forefront of measuring that risk for our customers. And this work I'm going to talk to you today in terms of the critical controls ultimately came from, discovery, or as a function of a really dislocated insurance market. So to Patrick's point, the insurers historically charge rock bottom prices to transfer this risk. Many customers or insureds we're disincented to manage the risks, right? When we can't make very clear distinctions in terms of what's the return on my investment for, a new endpoint security system or additional network monitoring or to buy servers, right? That has traditionally been a more challenging investment than, capital equipment or things that afford companies greater margin or greater, earning potential directly. So that has lagged, but also we've had a significant gap in terms of the workforce and the workers needed to, secure these risks. So many firms may have a breach or be susceptible to a common vulnerability, like was published about the Microsoft Exchange servers that were limited on premise. And still to this day, a breach that was 2 years ago, we see significant numbers of firms who've been unable to even address that simple patch and address that critical vulnerability. So, we've been able to determine what are the key things that the insurance markets really look for, because they're trying to, make a profit and ensure profitable businesses and ensure security. And how do we communicate those standards both to our customers, but more broadly, that we can either, enable them to take those steps to enhance that security, bring to the forefront products and services that offer that, and really make it more of a turnkey and simple solution for those customers. Does that make sense how I talk about that? And does that resonate with the group in terms of the objectives? I just want to make sure and validate that. Okay, super. So to that end, really, the principal thing that caused this level of dislocation is the rise in ransomware losses. Now, just to make sure, generally speaking, is everyone on the line, pretty familiar with that and kind of how that's occurred and what ransomware does? And just to make sure, really this has been principally the use of malware or malicious software to lock up critical information or servers or processes and deny firms access to either critical technology infrastructure, critical information they need to process day-to-day operations, et cetera. This really came to the fore in the mid 2010s, but really accelerated in the back half of the decade. So NotPetya was one of the big ransomware attacks and the largest, individual kind of measured event that's affected the economy relative to ransomware. That's the big event that occurred due to conflicts between Russia and Ukraine. That was the event that has stemmed this really large conversation around kind of war and quote unquote cyber terrorism. And every kind of article you've ever seen or read about does cyber insurance pay for claims or things of that nature has been rooted to that event. At that time, many customers did not even buy cyber insurance, and that was really the wake up call for them to say, all right, even if we don't have, kind of a big stack of healthcare information or credit card information, we have really significant potential for loss because the economy is highly reliant on technology, every business more so each and every day. And, kind of the theme of this risk in total has been the exponential increase of risk and threat because of those changes. And it always shocks me, especially coming from an underwriting background, how often we expect, that manual processes, persist and that they'll allow us to continue business even if we have some type of outage. And that, frankly, just is not the reality, right? That when firms have these types of attacks, they're really brought to their knees quickly, and the kind of financial effect is really staggering. We have customers who, for example, will notify us of a ransom event on a Friday. It's quite shocking how often these things happen on a Friday night or on off hours or over a holiday weekend, to kind of maximize the pain from a response standpoint. But we've had oftentimes customers who will report an event on a Friday evening, who will go through their response processes over a weekend, and they'll receive, payment authority from their insurance carriers on a Monday to, cut a 7-figure check to the bad guys to make them go away. So, that change really shifted the threat landscape. It's no longer, kind of financially viable for the bad guys to, uh, steal financial information. No one's looking for a big trove of credit card data because they have to go and monetize that, and there's protections around it, right? It's much more lucrative to send, targeted phishing campaigns. We see huge amounts of just publicly available information available online. It's very, easy for the bad guys to target and determine, right, who are individuals at a firm who may have fiduciary authorities or wire transfer authorities, who are folks who might have the keys to the kingdom from an administrative standpoint or an IT standpoint. So that, those things really led to a lot of dislocation. And the biggest thing, frankly, was that the underwriting community or the insurance community really couldn't answer the core questions in terms of what is the scale of this loss. We're seeing new stuff happen every day. So how do we quantify it? I kind of broke those laws of insurance. The ransom payments were going out very, very quickly, and it disallowed them to invest the money. Again, another kind of core insurance fundamental. But they really didn't know what controls were necessary to prevent these attacks. Is going back to Patrick's, kind of core observation about the workforce. A lot of these carriers who wrote these policies and developed these products didn't have an inherent level of expertise around any of the things for this. Particularly, they were heavily rooted in kind of data privacy and privacy laws, and didn't understand particularly the first party costs. So business interruption, if we go down, what do we lose? The actual extortion costs to pay the bad guys to go away, to source the cryptocurrency, to do the negotiation with the bad guys, all of the forensic recovery, et cetera, investigation, defense and attorneys, all of that is covered part and parcel with the insurance policy. All of it comes with a service front end. So firms don't have to, for example, set up all of those relationships independently. And also, well, right, that there's a huge concern from businesses that pardon me, if we have an event, are we going to have to be on a payment, do the payment, who's do this? Pardon me. Can you all hear me? Super.
Yeah, you're good,
Most
Andrew. It was
businesses,
just cutting out
okay,
for a second.
super. No, that's all right. Most businesses don't have those things, kind of on the front end or set up. So these policies come with those things. And that's really a great, kind of conversation starter for us or for anyone in the organization to, kind of bring these issues to the forefront and have those conversations of, are we prepared? Do we have appropriate incident response plans? Do we have, vendors online that we want to work with or prefer? Do we have, insurance protections for these things, et cetera? So that's been very effective to, kind of bring those issues up, to elevate them into business, et cetera. And now things are getting much better, and we're seeing, kind of competition return to the marketplace. So the insurers have said, all right, we figured out kind of what critical controls exist. Marsh and our partners have helped, kind of socialize that across the ecosystem. We've seen huge uptick in those rates, and then we've also seen the insurance be repriced. So you'll see here, for example, just what Patrick spoke about throughout 2020 and 2021, especially, we saw huge amounts of dislocation in the insurance marketplace. Basically you can see that all of our customers are basically at least doubling their premiums or taking huge increases. And these also came with material changes to the scope of coverage. So to Patrick's point again, the insurers would say to, many customers, it's not even a function of putting a price on it. We will just walk away from your business and not afford you, the option to transfer the risk. Many firms that we worked with, especially in areas like manufacturing, government, professional services, industries that were really hit hard from a loss standpoint, we would see firms who would be able to transfer tens of millions of dollars of risk or buy tens of millions of dollars of limits of insurance. They would do so at a rate that would pay the insurers back like 1 in every 100 years for a total loss. And then they would go to the insurance market the next year and say, hey, we can't even transfer $5 to $10 million of risk for 5 times more than we paid for it, because the insurers would just say, look, we don't know the answers to the questions, but we perceive you to be a difficult risk. And, we just don't have the appetite to take that on right now. So that was really the most critical aspect. And Marsh and kind of our peers have worked very hard to, kind of proactively help our customers avoid that in the future. So whether it's, again, identifying the controls and socializing them, coming up with other platforms and solutions like insurance products or incident response type products, or helping, also our customers identify kind of technology services or enhancements, that's something that's all elevated its game and become more part and parcel with the core work we do, because it's just become so critical around that. So I'll pause on that. Are there any questions before I go forward and really kind of get into what those controls are and how we've positioned them?
One thing I'll say, Andrew, is just that you're saying the same things that I've been seeing in the market. I mean, there's a reason why they call the industry today, like an alphabet soup, because of how many different acronyms there are. You've got, EDR, MDR, SOC, SASE, SOC as a service, all these different acronyms. And people are just collecting these different security controls, like they're going out of style. But what they lack is knowledge about how those security controls work together, right? And how you can actually, build a comprehensive cybersecurity structure with those security tools. So I'm excited for us to get into that side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing as well, Calvin, is we find time and time again that it's not just, kind of thinking about how things interact, the configurations and properly deploying them, but we often find post-loss that, organizations oftentimes don't know where the blind spots are, right? Or they perceive their controls to be deployed across, for example, 100% of their endpoints, but come to find out, right, that, oh, that didn't hit, 5% of servers we forgot about or didn't think were critical. And, that's what led to a pretty significant financial effect. So yeah, absolutely. And, once again, I'll just kind of focus on, this is the core of like kind of what Marsh delivers to our customers relative to cyber risk. Ultimately, again, that kind of insurance and risk transfer is critical, but we also support customers via, propping up incident management services, as well as kind of risk and analytics, helping them quantify risk, figure out where in the business, there's value at risk, as well as the resilience piece of it, right? So identifying service providers, best of breed technology stacks and offerings, et cetera. So that's kind of the core of what we do. I sit in the insurance world, and really one of the critical things that we afford to our customers and is critical to our process is what we call a cyber self-assessment. So really, it is a holistic assessment of our customers, kind of cyber resiliency and security posture. It is aligned with the NIST standard. So, that's a critical, cybersecurity standard that's very well publicized and adopted by, industry at large. It's the work the government's done to really push out that level of standardization in terms of, how we think about cybersecurity and resiliency. And we supplement that with a ton of questions that, we've kind of gleaned from the insurance market that are critical to risk or afford good client outcomes. So it's quite an enormous assessment. We can tailor it to each customer based on their size and scale. But ultimately, it is a multifaceted assessment. It hits things like IT, governance, procurement, supply chain, et cetera. And then, they answer 1,000 questions in a digital platform, and that informs lots of deliverables that we give to the client. There are, kind of analytics and risk assessments that we provide to them to say, all right, how resilient are you on your network infrastructure? What's the security? How many records do you have, and what do you do based on that? What's the financial effect of a projected ransomware loss? If you have a business interruption event, what's the perceived impact? And then we, kind of overlay that with a bunch of information that helps us give them better insurance outcomes. But the core of what this does, it is, their insurance submission to the marketplace. So this is a holistic, kind of risk assessment for our customers to identify and track cyber risk and to inform, kind of all of our outcomes. So we go through this process and, again, all online. And one of the things that we get from it is a report that looks like this. So this is a dashboard report that we call the, kind of top cybersecurity controls, and we map it to 12 key items, kind of big rocks topics that, we know are mission critical, for the insurers, and that we perceive to be mission critical for our customers to, secure themselves. So to this end, all of these are, generally speaking, force ranked in terms of their level of criticality, and kind of they go on down to the least important, or the ones that are less critical. But generally speaking, all of these have been relatively standardized over the last 3 years or so. We saw a lot of disruption in terms of the number of questions we would ask and the scale and scope of them. But most of these have become relatively standard, and we see, more iterative updates year over year. 3 years ago, we would very rarely receive questions, for example, about a client's use of multi-factor authentication. Now, we ask questions not only do you have it, but also to what extent, where is it sitting, what assets are deployed, et cetera, et cetera. So this informs that conversation and allows us to really pinpoint and identify, what specific elements of control are either perceived to be lacking, or maybe areas that we can highlight, and also informs a pretty deep discussion that we have with each of our customers of how these things interact, how we get the best outcome. So as to say, if there's an area of perceived weakness, what are the compensating controls? How do we speak to what else is in place? And how do we also identify particularly low cost or high value things that you can change without buying a new contract, or things of that nature? For example, there's a huge focus on how we protect administrative accounts, or accounts that have privileged access. So the standard kind of attack chains we see are bad guys either use social engineering, phishing, or like a remote kind of protocol exploit, RDP type exploits, or some kind of breach in remote access security. They get into the business, they use that access to, gain access to some type of privileged account or privileged credential, and they use those credentials to traverse laterally across the network until they can elevate privilege to the point where they can launch an attack. So from that standpoint, really putting a ton of focus on those key issues, and I'll just go through them quickly. Would it be effective to just go through these in linear order and speak for a bit about each of them?
think so, Andrew. And one thing I would like to know, and I'm sure other people would be dying to know as well, in your experience, are any of these more neglected than the other ones? Are any of these, do you see more often than not that a lot of businesses are lacking a handful of these, or does it seem to just be kind of random?
I wouldn't say that it is random. I think, in general, one of the key themes that we stress or that we understand is that deployment of kind of shared services or, kind of managed security is highly beneficial. So businesses who are able to, move business processes to the cloud, take advantage of third parties who have significant scale relative to security and infrastructure, like an AWS, a Google, a Microsoft, et cetera, using third parties, managed security providers, folks that can monitor your network and deploy response assets in the event of attack. Those capabilities are really, really valuable and differentiated. And in the light that Patrick spoke about, where there's just a huge gap in talent and resource for security, those firms who are not taking advantage of those types of services and who are trying to manage them all, in-house via one individual or things of that nature, I think those are the firms where we really see gaps, and that presents a significant opportunity, especially for those SME type firms who are very likely to, be operating in those kind of constructs and who can really benefit from, kind of shared and managed services.
That makes perfect sense.
And that ranges across a lot of the vectors, right? So whether it's how your email security is set up, your ability to quickly deploy patches, even just monitoring the network, all of that is easier. Not to say if it's necessarily outsourced, but if you're using a managed provider, right? If you have an Outlook webmail that's in the cloud, that's being managed and secured without your direct input. If you have automated servers that are patched for you, right? You don't have to have the same cadence of doing that internally and following that. So just again, I think those are critical. I do see we have a question.
Hi, yes. I had a question on the previous slide, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
I was trying to understand the color coding there. Is the intent to have the insured party to be in green on all of these, or how does it play into the maturity
Yeah.
assessment, I guess, is what I'm trying to
Yeah,
understand.
it is. So for example, and this is just a sample, but you'll see here, for example, that we have the big rock idea right on the key control. So the 12 categories in the CSA questions column, that's meant to represent the particular data inputs that tie to that area. And the stoplight is exactly your view of, okay, this just gives us, we make them fill out 1,000 questions. So this is to allow them to easily digest, okay, how is the market going to think of us across these 12 vectors, and where do we have strengths or area for improvement? Bear with me. And bear with me just one second. Sorry about that. To that end, we want them all to be green to the extent that they can be. But I think to the team's earlier point, that's really hard. It's also not always economically viable or effective to say, all right, let's answer every question yes. That's really not the intent or even the expectation, right? We know that every firm, for example, you may secure your email with SPF versus VCAM, where you might just buy a proof point solution, right? It's not just a function of checking every single box. So it's part of our value too, to understand again how those things interact, where we can highlight changes or things that they do. And if it's red or green, some of them are just kind of inherent. So for example, you'll see that like end of life systems is marked as red. Almost every single customer we work with is red, because it's just inherently risky. Almost everybody has to assume some liability related to legacy technologies to operate their business. Hopefully they're cordoning those technologies off or affording appropriate support for them. But, it's just kind of an inherent risk. So, we want to see them all green, and we prefer to see the ones at the top be green. And particularly because it's not just in terms of, how we perceive them to be like, this is the most important one, it has the most financial effect. pardon me, but if customers do not have, for example, pretty significant deployment of multi-factor authentication for all remote access of employees and for contractors, but also has that in place for like critical assets. If you don't have that in place and you don't have kind of a demonstrated ability to kind of recover your business in the event of an attack, the way you manage backup capabilities is like really important to the underwriters, because those two things,
Right.
a lot of the attacks come in because of RDP or remote attacks. And if they get in and you can't get back up and running, or they access the backups in your SOL, those are like the two things. Like, okay, we can't insure you if you don't have those things. Like it more becomes less about like what is my rate and what is my price, versus if you don't have those things, like the insurers are going to give you an insurance contract that's not worth the paper it's printed on. You know what I mean? Like it's going to be so, the value proposition is going to be so poor that we really focus in on those things to get the most bang for your buck.
And did I hear you say this is sorted by order of priority? Is that accurate?
Yes, but again, in that context of not necessarily like, okay, this is the most bang for your buck, or this has to be in place, but just more framed in the insurance outcome, which is, if you don't secure access to your network and you can't get back up and running in the event of an attack, you're almost uninsurable. And that does very much translate to like, the scale and degree of perceived risk or financial risk in the business. So yes, it is ranked in that way, but it's not in the way that you might think, I guess. But very much it is like, force ranked. I just want to be careful about how I frame it.
Oh, yeah, no, it helps. Thank you. Thanks for you.
Thank you. Any other questions before I move on?
I think we're good, Andrew.
Super. So here, we really just start to get into, just what some of those controls are and why they are critical. And I will go through them, kind of in order. If there are questions, please feel free to interject. And certainly, the multi-factor authentication, again, highly critical. That's going to be the token for access, the push prompt that you get to access the network. In most cases, that's going to be deployed on like a Duo or an Okta, and in many cases on an individual's phone. And where that can be challenging too is bad guys are highly sophisticated, and multi-factor authentication is really the first hurdle that makes it way harder for them to launch an attack. I'll recommend to everybody on a personal level, like if you do not use multi-factor authentication for your personal email that's critical, or your banking information, absolutely turn that on like right now. That's like the most critical thing you can do to safeguard your personal information. So if you're not doing that in your personal life, I highly recommend it. But that's highly critical. So, that's the one thing of paramount importance that every organization can do. And, in a lot of cases, again, if we're using hosted services like a Microsoft webmail or things of that nature, those tools can automatically deploy MFA without significant cost via text messaging or online platforms. So to that end, it's less common now that we issue physical tokens. That can certainly be done, but much lower cost to deploy those things. And again, those remote desktop instances and phishing and social engineering continue far and away to be the leading causes of loss. So that's what helps there. Endpoint detection and response, this one is relatively obvious, but actually is something that has been really socialized over the last 3 years. So we're talking about, really automated capabilities, that will monitor the network and allow you to respond to perceived malicious events, attackers, et cetera. So it's highly critical that those capabilities are deployed holistically across the network. And when we talk to our customers, right, it's okay, are you monitoring workstations? Are you monitoring servers? How do you, monitor and secure critical assets like the domain controllers that, really run the privilege of the network? Thinking of those types of options is highly critical. And, really, those are big issues that we speak to our customers on, every day. And we've really been working to, kind of increase our capabilities to say, which of these are best in breed? How does your organization function? And how can these things interplay too? Because that's also a critical consideration. there can be lots of different, kind of product and service offerings across all of these controls. And for each organization, that is a consideration. Do these things work well together? Do they talk to each other? Are, the technologies you have in place going to interface in a way that's effective? That's a very critical consideration as well, and something I'd encourage everybody to, try to dive in on. Again, secure encrypted backups. The gold standard for this is what is called immutable backups, and effectively, that is technology that uses the blockchain to write the backup in a way that cannot be altered. So those are typically stored away from the network and afford firms the ability, really to get back up and running. And that's been a huge sea change, as firms have understood some of these changes and socialized them. It has led to the ransomware threat actors changing their game, right? So very commonly, we find firms are able to get back up and running and they don't pay the ransom attack. So the bad guys have pivoted to, double extortion techniques. They might steal data, threaten to leak it, et cetera, to really try to turn the screws and get some money out of it. Yes, Patrick.
Oh, I was going to mention that, people are very, I shouldn't say people, but companies are very reliant on backup. Oh, I don't need you guys to help us. We have backup, or we're not, if we do get hit, we've got backup. Well, they're just too reliant on backup. I have seen backup encrypted. What are you going to do when your backup's encrypted? So, that just don't completely rely on your backup.
100%. Or this is another area that we consistently find the stated capabilities or the perceived capabilities end up having significant gap to what ends up hitting the road at the end of the day. That either certain databases were not able to be recovered or were not subject to the regular update. There were gaps in terms of what the information would be. So we find that time and again, and demonstrating the ability to restore from backup and taking on those exercises, really can be a differentiator and be important for firms to take it on. Pardon me. I'll speak really quickly to two of these before going back to one. Email security, again, automating that and getting third-party tools, critically important. Phishing and social engineering continues to be, again, just the most critical threat vector. Employee training efforts are critical, especially as artificial intelligence has made it easier to launch, kind of compelling and creative attacks to people. Bad guys are really clever in terms of, the way they frame emails to make you think they're legitimate or come from legitimate actors within the firm. So, putting security around the gates to make sure that's done is critical, and also that patch management. So we see very, very often, that we use scanning technologies like a BitSight, security scorecard, et cetera, to help, kind of inform customers of risks they face. And the ability to make those patches and updates such that you're not privy to a threat from a known vulnerability, highly critical. So we focus on those things with customers very regularly and really want to see that there's, kind of automated capabilities and that they can get in front of things quickly if they're urgent or a 0-day comes in. And lastly,
and Andrew,
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, one of the things when it comes to employee training and going back to like MFA, that's one of the things I think a lot of businesses are missing. It's just proper employee training, especially on multi-factor authentication, because I've heard of multiple breaches, like Uber and MGM recently come to mind, where the hacker just used social engineering to bypass MFA. So there's nothing wrong with the technology, but they take advantage of the humans behind it. They convince someone to send them a passcode just this once, or maybe they even call them on the phone. They get the help desk on the line, or they talk to somebody from IT, and they tell them this whole sob story. Just let me buy this one time, and then boom, it's all over for them. And so
that's exactly right.
I think what you're saying there.
That's a great yeah, that's a great observation. And just to build on that, I got a new machine on Monday. And one of the things that the gentleman who rebuilt my machine and gave me the new one asked is like, I'm going to tunnel in, I'm rebuilding your computer. I'm going to tunnel into the network. So I need you to approve the push on your Okta when I ping you for it. And I was like, oh God, that makes me like incredibly nervous. I met the guy in person, so I knew he was doing that. It was no issue, but you're exactly right that those kind of things really, happen all the time. And I think also too, one of the things that sits on top of that, or we've seen over the last year, Calvin, is like a focus on layered defense. It's not just like putting a big wall around the whole perimeter of the organization. It's really having a a web of capabilities that interact and speak to each other and build upon one another. So by example, if you have MFA working, that puts a really, significant web around the organization. But they can get around that, and there are ways to bypass the attack, or maybe it's misconfigured and they can scrape a credential off of memory. They use that to try to elevate privilege. Well, if we have an effective, monitoring capability, we can see some of the malicious activity going on, or strange behavior when that person tries to, for example, access greater level of privilege or to escalate what they're doing. An effective privilege account management tool allows those credentials to be locked down, to be rotated, to be encrypted, that we can see their capabilities and how they're operating very, very quickly. And maybe we can stamp out an attack, or if that fails and the bad guys are able to launch ransomware, well, we've got immutable backups that are segregated from our network and hosted in the cloud as well. And then we can just turn them back on, and we can demonstrate our ability to back up. So from those ends, that's like kind of how we speak to customers and how those things interact. But Calvin, to your point, that really, I think, shows that example both of how these things interact and talk to each other, but also the importance of configuration and, kind of practicing around them.
And that's kind of, I think that's like, if I were to make one point, it would just be, what you said about that layered approach, because like Pat mentioned, backups are great, but they can get encrypted. MFA is fantastic, but sometimes the human element lets people get past it. And that's why you need, up to 12 different cybersecurity controls sometimes to remain safe, is because they support each other, they back each other up when one of them fails. And it's really important to have a lot of these different plans in place, because life happens. And at the end of the day, you can't really plan for it. All you can do is prepare as best as you can, which this plan that Marsh has created and this approach, can help customers do.
That's exactly right. And, I think we have to acknowledge as well that, these threat actors are highly sophisticated. They are oftentimes, how do I say this fairly, at least tangentially linked to sophisticated nation state actors, and the financial motivations for this level of crime are incredibly significant. So it is not as though these are fly-by-night actors, right? They're highly sophisticated, and the financial consequences, are just very significant. So I think that's exactly right. And, I also think too, it's important just to acknowledge that, especially on this page, a lot of the practices, really are more around preparedness and kind of how all the things speak to one another or interact. Incident response planning and training. I mean, we see time and time again just significantly better financial outcomes for our customers who, focus on those things and make them a priority. When we think of, again, like those things about patching and network monitoring, those things are just really critical relative to the risks we assume and how broad the infrastructure is, and, how much threat there is from IT outsourcing and things of that nature. So I will say that, we acknowledge the benefits of outsourcing and shared services and managed services. They really afford huge benefits to the vast majority of customers that use them. The downside, however, is individual firms have huge reliance on systems that they don't own or maintain. They create kind of choke points in the economy. So if AWS goes down, or if the Google Cloud goes down, we're probably in pretty bad shape for a significant period of time. Just so much of the economy is not going to be able to function. But again, I mean, those things are highly, highly resilient. And there's a lot of redundancy baked in and a lot of security baked in. But we do have to kind of grapple with and wrestle with the inherent risk of the consolidation and the shared nature of some of these services. And that's been a very critical consideration, for the insurance economy, for government, internationally. There's lots of focus in terms of the war in Ukraine and kind of, global threat actors. There's always conversation of like war and cyber terrorism. But broadly speaking, I think the message has been pretty clear that these insurance policies are highly valuable for the customers. The scale of loss and recovery they're able to get has been, in the billions of dollars. And the policies have, never been broader as to what they do for the customers. And these types of risks, are really not going to go away. So every year, and frankly, much more frequently than that, we update our inputs into these assessments. We make sure we're capturing, the most critical inputs, that if there's a new threat that our customers need to, kind of respond to, that we highlight it, that if there are new vulnerabilities to scan for, we scan for them, all those type of things. So it is a moving target. It's not moving quite as quickly as it was in years past. We're pretty well established in terms of how we raise the bar to be more resilient. But again, they'll continue to evolve, but I think we'll keep chipping away on some of the big issues. And we will obviously share the presentation with you all as well, so you can have, access to the additional data and just the written portions of it. I do want to highlight as well, we have some information that we can speak to that, kind of speaks on like the ransomware environment, and here you have some loss trends. We also do have just information about the insurer profitability and kind of how much money they've been making, and the number of privacy claims. I know we're really focused on, the more kind of technical aspects and controls, but are there any questions in particular, or happy to turn the conversation over to the group for any, open items or things we'd like to chat on?
Andrew, I want to congratulate you on going through the presentation without seeing one hoodie. Every time you see a cybersecurity presentation, there's a guy in a hoodie at a computer and he's hacking something. But that I want to double down on what you said earlier, that the attackers have matured and they're very slick. And at Hughes, we're defending against nation states now. There's and also terrorists. And these guys, it's their full-time job. They come in, they work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and their job is to go in, infiltrate companies, extract data, sell it on the dark web, and make money to, to take care of and to foster terrorism and to provide for their nation, money and revenue. So it's a business, and we're protecting against that, and we take it very seriously.
That's exactly right. And, I think a couple examples that really hone that in. First, we saw a greater, kind of not spike, but deceleration in ransomware activity in the early days of the pandemic than we did, for example, during the early days of the war in Ukraine, because, like everyone else, those threat actors were working to set up their remote work capabilities and kind of change how they were doing that, right? So that was one element where it just really reiterated that aspect, that these are run like very significant, multinational businesses, even though they're domiciled in places that are unfriendly to our interests. But I'll also say as well, this exhibit that you can see on the screen right now, this trends, or rather tracks the trends relative to reported ransomware incidents that we see. So, we're the largest insurance broker in the world. We see a representative sample of insurance claims and events, right? Especially in cyber, where we have a huge foothold. So we can see, for example, the trends and how these attacks are occurring, what the outcomes are. We supplement that with external data of other actors who are also tracking these things. For example, defense firms, ransom negotiators, all on and on. And by that same example, I just wanted to call out that you see on the bottom corner, just a listing of some of the groups that are active and being tracked, by government or by the security infrastructure. Lockbit, for example, is one that is just really commonly known and is the largest and most active. But I want to reiterate, Patrick, Lockbit is in the news this week because they were making claims that they had breached Boeing and had taken some of their information. And just to kind of highlight, right, the scale of these actors, that they're targeting firms that are critical to national defense and infrastructure, that have high levels of security, right? If they are stating that they can breach a firm that has military levels of security, where does that leave every other firm relative to the defenses that they can deploy? And how do we operate in a world where we just understand that, firms are going to be under constant attack, and their ability to, parry those attacks in real time and constantly is critical. I always find that to be staggering, for large firms, just how large or even for small and mid-sized firms, how large the attack surface is, how many domains or IP addresses they might own, their ability to secure them, and then how quickly, that can be attacked and come down. I always find that to be, just very insightful. So thinking about those things is both scary, but something we can manage.
It's no coincidence that the Chinese jet fighters look very much like the American fighters, and they come out a few years later. No coincidence there, and it's no coincidence that when Callaway came out with a very expensive set of golf clubs, that they were on the market and available online on the black market within about 2 weeks. So.
Yeah.
They're stealing, they're not just stealing data and turning it into money, they're stealing intellectual property, from American companies.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it is, and even beyond that, we've seen examples where, they'll go in and target, for example, financial firms or highly differentiated American firms, and they'll want to see, like, how is it structured? What are your org charts? How does the business operate from a competitive standpoint, so we can prop up similar institutions in other jurisdictions? Like, that type of thing happens quite frequently. But I think, just in general, to reiterate your point, Patrick, is that our reliance on technology is never going to diminish. It is only going to increase. The utilization of technology as a core differentiator, again, is only going to decrease. And firms that are able to demonstrate that they are, understand kind of security and technology risks, but are managing them, are going to be the only firms kind of left at the end of the day over a long-term time horizon. So anything that we can do to, not only highlight these issues, but inform, our partners and customers of solutions to meet them. That is certainly at Marsh, how we are really striving to interact with our customers and strive for differentiation. And it sounds like from a Hughes perspective as well, that's a critical priority.
Yeah, we like to use the term, or I like to use the term, over the horizon, on a daily basis, knowing what the threats are before they even hit.
Exactly. And we've been doing a lot of work, particularly to put quantification around those things. So not just, in terms of, if I do X, how does it affect my insurance premiums, but really thinking about, again, how do we help customers kind of direct their investment or their limited amount of resources to make sure that, okay, how do we leverage data and insights to understand, is there one or two things we can do that are more effective than others? Are there particular controls that are linked to loss prevention or particular claims that we can highlight and save those exposures for our customers? We're working pretty hard to do those things. And I think that kind of is going to be the root of how we see around the corner. It's like, how do we make better and more informed decisions, and how do we be proactive versus reactive?
Exactly.
Are there any other questions?
We will have some time in a second here, Andrew, for chat-based questions in the Q&A. And so, if there's anything else you want to share, I think you're good to go ahead, and if not, we can save some time for the chat-based Q&A.
Yeah, I think questions is fine. We've hit all the material that really wanted to speak on. We'll share these as well, such that the group can distribute these and share them or leverage any of the insights. But if there are any questions on these topics, or really any, happy to take them.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Andrew. This session has been great. As we're wrapping up, feel free to go ahead and type those questions in the Q&A tool in Teams. We can take a couple minutes to try to answer those, so feel free to go ahead. While you're typing those questions, I just want to make you all aware that there are a lot of great resources for you to check out on both Hughes and Marsh's websites. So collateral like ebooks, white papers, other videos and webinars. You can even take the cyber self-assessment for your business that Andrew shared earlier. So if you have a question that doesn't get answered here today, I would encourage you to go check those out. And I'm positive you'll be able to find more answers and information there as well. So.
And Andrew, you mentioned a really good resource, NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology. They offer, they're part of the Department of Commerce, and they offer to the small business and medium-sized business the Cybersecurity Framework, CSF. And that's a good place to start in your journey to, to shore up, your company against cyber threats. And they happen to be located near us, our headquarters in Maryland. They're just a couple miles away. No affiliation. This is not a commercial for NIST, but it's just a good place to start.
Yeah, that and ISO 27001 are the two kind of standards that are most commonly accepted or used by our customers to guide them in their efforts.